Minister, my question is framed around students in primary and secondary school, and I suppose the lack of supports that there are for those with special needs, the necessary supports. We did see the protest outside Leinster House here last week, parents completely frustrated, and of course I'm no different than any other TD in this Dáil chamber. We have them come to our clinics, unfortunately on a very regular basis, parents of children attending both primary and secondary, and I wonder if you could outline today what your plans are to get rid of the backlog that's clearly there and restricting children from accessing those important resources.
Okay, I'd like to thank the Deputy for this question. I can inform the Deputy that in 2017 my department introduced a new model to support pupils with special educational needs. This means schools are now front-loaded with additional teachers to enable them to respond to pupil needs rather than requiring an assessment to allow them to apply for such additional resources. And just to back up my previous contribution, that's the type of model we're trying to bring in under the social inclusion pilot that we've just launched. This reduces the administrative burden on schools, as schools will no longer have to complete an application process annually and apply for newly enrolled pupils who require additional teaching support. Children who need support can have that support provided immediately rather than having to wait for a diagnosis. Additionally, some pupils with developmental issues may require an assessment of need, which is provided by the HSE services. My department's National Educational Psychological Service delivers a tiered consultative model of service. Each school takes responsibility for initial assessment, educational planning and intervention for pupils with difficulties, including those with developmental delay. Teachers consult with their NEP psychologists for assistance should they need to at this stage in the process. Only in the event of a failure to make reasonable progress in spite of the school's best efforts in consultation with NEPs will the psychologist become directly involved with an individual child for intensive intervention or assessment. This system allows psychologists to give early attention to urgent cases and also to help many more children indirectly than could be seen individually. It also ensures that children are not referred unnecessarily for psychological support. I would advise that parents of children in schools for whom concerns exist in relation to developmental delay should, in the first instance, raise the matter with the principal of the relevant school with a view to involving the assigned NEP psychologist in the issue where appropriate.
And I do applaud your intention, and I know it's heartfelt, intended. However, the reality on the ground would appear to me very different, in the sense that I have parents coming to me completely frustrated, and frustrated with the fact that, yes, you're right, the HSE have a duty when it comes to the assessment of need, and we have children waiting 18 months, 2 years, and still no assessment of need. And as we know, that has a domino effect in terms of the supports or the lack of supports that are provided in school, and holds the whole system back. Now, you talked about a model there that I see bypasses that perhaps, but I don't feel that that's filtering into the school and that that's a reality for parents on the ground. I see not only the parents being frustrated, but also principals in school who are tasked with trying to coax and cajole students into school every day, because there are developmental issues, there are mental health issues, there are learning difficulty issues, and they do not have the supports in schools to deal with that. So I would ask you, Minister, how good is the communication between your department and the HSE when it comes to this assessment of need? Because 18 months to 2 years, it's just not good enough.
Minister, if you are aware that many parents and indeed grandparents are being forced to go privately because the waiting list for the assessments is so long, or in the case of a child who may have ASD issues, there is no provision to actually get an assessment any time before the child is 3.5. By then, the child may have clear verbal issues and other behavioural issues. And, you know, I realise you've only come recently to the area, but there's an incredible amount. I have heard of people spending €1,200 on assessment, parents, grandparents, the whole family bunching together to try and get this vital assessment. Because in the system, unless you have the assessment, nothing can be done for you. And schools are trying to help as well. So it's a really difficult area. I mean, the assessments are meant to cost 200, 400, but in practice, a lot of assessments, Minister, cost a lot more than that.
Yeah, look, the most important time in any child's development is the first 1,000 days. And we're talking about early years here. We're talking about the transition into junior primary school, and then the process and ongoing progression into senior classes in primary school as well. And I was speaking to a principal today, this morning, in a school, and she was talking about the delay when an assessment was even given in the early years, and then it took the delay. Then there was a delay into junior, senior infants, and into first class. So there is an issue here with the coordination between the different stakeholders, HSE, officials within different departments. So that's why I'm trying to work this pilot in a very comprehensive way, that it's looking at not just primary school, it's looking at that process from junior, from early years into, and having that information, and the schools having that information, rather than just meeting the student at the front gate. That pilot will start in September. We've allocated 4.75 million to it, but I want to see that model developing. It will be evaluated, but I think it won't address the immediate issues of frustration, be it on the parents' level, as the Deputy pointed out, or the teachers' end of things as well. But we have to get the coordination right, and that progress from early years to junior.
The initial point I was making, how long do you envisage, or what is your target for clearing those backlogs that exist in terms of actually providing these supports for students, in terms of bypassing the lengthy procedure that they go through at the moment? And I'll give you another example, Minister. I have a student, and he's a secondary school student, little second year I think he is, but his mum is extremely, I suppose, exasperated, cannot get her child to school. There is obviously a developmental issue there. There is obviously learning support there. He has now run into a serious number of days of high absenteeism, which of course brings along a whole raft of other difficulties for the parents in terms of, it doesn't help in terms of relationships between school management, between school authorities, and between parents. And parents are absolutely doing their best. School is doing their best, but there is no communication, there's no link, and that child is falling through the net.
Yeah, look, 2017, there was a big change in 2017. The revised allocation process replaced the need for diagnosis, and the school gets the profile funding, and the first port of call or entry for a student into a primary school, for example, it isn't dependent on a diagnosis. So what we're trying to do in this pilot model, the social inclusion pilot, is to have that same profiling, that schools that schools don't follow the diagnosis, that they follow an allocation, and it's up to the schools then to allocate those resources. But it's very important to point out that we need collaboration, and we need, whether in an early year, if a 3-year-old is diagnosed with needing special or speech and language support, that the primary school principal knows that and even has that information when they come into junior infants, to ensure that that support continues, rather than having to wait a year or 2 years. It's a big challenge, but it's the right thing to do, and we do need to look at new ways of doing it. In terms of the money that's come in since 2011, 1.75 billion a year, we're looking at a 44% increase in SNAs, 15,000 SNAs. A lot of work has been carried out, and whether it's CNOs, whether it's people working in the NCSE section, they're working really hard, but things are changing. There's different complex issues in homes that we need to be careful of, but ultimately it's about ensuring that each child, irrespective of their challenges, gets equal treatment.